Welcome back, people. In our last video, we started Unit 10 and discussed a global economy, so how the world works and how money flows between countries. And we also did a little bit of discussion on trade advantages and how you can be better than one country in comparison, and how you can have an absolute advantage or comparative advantage, and how you get one of those advantages. And we also discussed two different ways of viewing an economy, so either pro-government regulation, which would be Karl Marx, or anti-government regulation, which would be Adam Smith. So we kind of discussed how the economy works, but we did not discuss ways to make sure that it is doing well and ways to make sure that we can fix it if it is not doing well. So today we're going to talk about economic indicators. And we're going to start with this cartoon. And you know, if I show you a cartoon, you should probably remember it because it will pop up into your life later on. So this cartoon says this man whose label on himself is corporate America. So remember, corporate sounds like corporation, which is one of the types of businesses that we discussed in Unit 9. And he says, free trade at last, free trade at last. Thank God Almighty we have free trade at last. So he's holding shackles in one hand and a whip in the other. So TPP is a World Trade Organization, and NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. So he is all about this free trade life, but as we see at his feet, not benefiting from free trade are U.S. workers and workers abroad. So massive layoffs, vanishing worker rights, slave wages, and no workers' rights whatsoever. So this cartoonist is implying that free trade is really only benefiting the people at the top of the pyramid rather than the people at the bottom who move the business forward. In this cartoon, the roller coaster is Wall Street, and it says, "Don't panic. This is just a correction." All right, and this roller coaster is kind of a symbol for what is called the business cycle, and that's next on our list. So at the top of your note sheet, please go ahead and draw this. This is kind of what the business cycle looks like. This is kind of like a wave, all right? So there's a bottom, there's a top, there's a place where it is expanding, and there's a place where it is kind of shrinking. So we'll label the business cycle, and this is kind of how the world economy or the United States economy, however you like to look at it, since this is macroeconomics, kind of how they change and move and shift over time. So our y-axis, instead of being price like it always is output, and our x-axis, instead of being quantity, is now time. So at the bottom, we have a trough, which is the lowest point that we reach in our economy. And then once we reach that lowest point, the only direction we can go is up. And we call these expansions. So please make sure that you're labeling these on the business cycle you're writing on your note sheet. And we know that all good things come to an end. So the very top of our business cycle, the highest that we can go in our economy, is called a peak. And eventually, once we hit our highest point, the only place we can go is back down again, and these are called recessions. And please go ahead and draw this as well, and make sure that this downward wave is the lowest of the ones on your business cycle. We call this a super low trough. We call this a depression. All right, and let's define expansion and recession, because we know that a peak is our highest point in our economy and our trough is our lowest point. So in expansion, we have more jobs, so the unemployment rate is decreasing, so we have more people in the workplace making money. There are pay raises. Businesses are opening, so if you have a stable economy, you're going to want to open your own business, and that is the point in time where you want to open it, not when the economy is not doing well. And people are going to spend money. We know that if people have money in the bank, they're likely going to spend it. They probably shouldn't, but as we all know, people will. Now, on the opposite side of that, during a recession, there are layoffs. So being laid off and being fired are not the same thing. So if you're fired, that means that you did something wrong. You made a mistake in your workplace. Now, a layoff is just when your employer can no longer afford to pay your salary, so they have to let you go. People get pay cuts instead of pay raises. Businesses are closing. No one wants to open a business at this point in time, and if the economy is not doing well, chances are that you are losing money in your business. And if you lose too much of it, You're going to have to close if you don't want to file bankruptcy. And then during a recession, people save money because there are hard times, and the more money you have in the bank, the better your life will be. So if you save your money, you'll be better off going through the recession. And then an unusually low trough is how we define a depression. So speaking of depressions, the one that we had that is the most significant for us in our nation's history is the Great Depression. So how did this even occur in the first place? People buy way too many products on credit. All right, this is called speculation. So you take risks in hope of profit, but we know that profit is not guaranteed. So people who made, at that point in time, salaries were not quite as high as they are now. So somebody would be making 10 grand a year, and they would be driving a car, a brand new car. They'd have a brand new house that they just bought. They just bought all new appliances for their home. They just bought a radio because TV at that point was not quite out and about and invented for in-home use. They would have the latest technology, but they wouldn't be able to pay for it out of their own pocket. They wouldn't be able to pay for it with a debit card or with the money that's in their checking account. So they would put it all on credit. And eventually, when the credit card companies start coming around to get their money back, people are not able to pay because they have lived outside of their means. They have spent too much and can no longer back it up. So then the stock market, as a result, crashes in October of 1929. So banks lose money in stocks. People withdraw their money, so they don't trust the bank anymore. If your banks are not stable, you are not going to keep your money there. So people would take money out of the banks, and then banks would have to close. Businesses start to lose money. They call in their loans that they have sent out to other people. They can no longer pay. So it's just a domino effect of negativity in the economy. And businesses are going to end up cutting labor or capital, so laying people off, selling parts that they don't need, cutting their business down to the absolute bare minimum that they need to pay the bills. And therefore, the effects of the Great Depression, in order to get us out of it, John M. Keynes, who was an economist back in the 1920s, said that the government can end the recession by spending money. Now, this sounds like it wouldn't work, but this is called the bottom-up approach, or the trickle-down approach. So if the government spends money on programs that help people, people will be more willing to spend money. The more money they spend, the more money is flowing into the economy, and therefore our economy will pick up. So that's his thing. So if we're willing to spend some money in the government on some programs that will help people and get them employed and give them a wage, they're going to start spending that money. Money starts flowing back into our economy, back into our businesses that are still open, and our economy can kind of pull itself up by the bootstraps. So FDR was president during the last part of the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover was president during the stock market crash in the few years after that, but he did not win a second term, so then FDR took over as president. So he introduced policy called the New Deal, and it increases the employment rate, so we have more people working. And the FDIC is created as the bank's insurance company. So you'll see these blue little circle stickers in the corner of the bank's windows that'll say FDIC. And then to regulate the stock market and make sure this doesn't happen again, we create the SEC. And this is the unemployment line back in the 1930s. All right, so how do we measure the economy? We have 4 tools that will tell us how our economy is doing overall, the first of which is called Gross Domestic Product, or GDP. So basically this is just a giant count of all of the goods and services that are sold in 1 year. Every gallon of milk, every gallon of gas, every tire, every new car that is sold, every house, all of that. This does not include imports or used items. So if we're talking about a domestic product, remember domestic is here at home, and we do not have any used items, because if you buy an 07 car, it's already been counted in the GDP in 2007, so you don't need to count it again this year. Our second indicator is called a standard or cost of living. So this measures the change in the average price of goods and services and allows for substitutions. So this is the count that shows us what our poverty rate is, or where our poverty line is. So how much money are you making where you actually are living in poverty? So what is your standard of living? What is your cost of living? So are you living with electricity and a microwave? Are you rolling with no microwave and no dishwasher? How are you living, and how much of that can be assisted by the government? Our third one is the unemployment rate. So this is, we know this already, the percentage of the population who is without a job and actively looking for one. So if you're at 6.5% unemployment, that's considered full employment. So 93.5% of your population is working. That's pretty great. Our last one is the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI. So this measures the change in the average price of goods and services and kind of how it changes from year to year. So you probably heard some old individuals say, like, back in my day, milk was only $1 a gallon or whatever, or back in my day, I only had to pay 42 cents for gas per gallon. Well, that's not the same now because we have what's called inflation. So over time, the cost of things rises, but then also the value of our money and what you can do with our money rises. All right, so what happens when these indicators are negative? What happens if our unemployment rate is super huge? What happens if our standard of living goes down and the poverty line increases? So the amount of money that you're making is not helping you cover your costs. How can we fix the economy? Well, we can make policy that helps us do this. And we will talk about that in our next video.